when I look back, it was the notion of splitting the atom, if you will, between data and media. And you could target based on content and context, or you could target based on some type of addressable characteristic. That was massive.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Identity Architects, the InfoSum podcast that spotlights the leaders in the media industry shaping the future of data-driven advertising. I'm your host, Ben Cicchetti, and this week I had the opportunity to sit down with the one and the only Matt Barash. Matt and I explore his career journey, the evolution of the adtech industry, the importance of talking about mental health, and much, much more. Before we jump into that conversation, this is a reminder to hit that subscribe button to be alerted when new episodes of Identity Architects are available. But without any further delay, here's my chat with Matt. Here we go. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by someone who has contributed so much to our industry and has now transcended into the realm of industry influencer. Matt Barash, welcome to the podcast.
I am blushing. I am flattered to be here. I'm excited, and let's kick it off. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think we've got so much to dig into. I'm excited to explore your background. Selfishly, I'm excited to just pick your brains a little bit. So I think it's going to be a super interesting conversation. But first, we'll start the way we always do, which is with our quickfire questions designed to get to know you a little bit better. Starting with, what is your earliest memory of advertising?
Okay, so if you know me or know anything about me, I have a ridiculous obsession with all things involving sneakers. And
Nice.
That had to have an origin story, right? And it goes back to a guy named Michael Jordan, who in the late 80s was a pretty good basketball player for the Chicago Bulls, but he wasn't greatness. And then one day, Nike came up with a campaign featuring Spike Lee, where Spike Lee played Mars Blackman. And the tagline was, "It's got to be the shoes." And so if you remember those creatives, they were black and white. They were airing during amazing, iconic basketball games. And they were also, print ads that eventually turned into the poster that I hung above my bed in college. And so, when it comes to first impressions, I think, I'm showing my age here, but, it's got to be the shoes has stuck with me throughout, right? 30 years later, I still talk about the shoes.
I love that. And as a sneakerhead myself, and on the other side of this camera, I've got a cabinet full of Jordan 1s because they're my obsession and they're a pretty healthy addiction to have. So I can completely appreciate that. So if you take yourself back to those days, what did you want to be when you were younger, when you were growing up?
Let's start with what I didn't want to be. My parents, I think my parents, my dad was a doctor, my mom was a lawyer, and I knew I didn't want to follow in the family footsteps. It seemed like a lot of schooling and a lot of extra work to be done. So I went to a high school that actually had a broadcast studio. And in high school, I was the anchor of the morning sports broadcast. And I thought, this is kind of cool, right? The media business is interesting. I like journalism. I really leaned in a big way. And then I realized it was a lot harder than it looked. I'd probably have to go move to someplace like, I don't know, Calgary, Alberta to get a start. And, and then weave and make my way back to maybe New York one day and, maybe to ESPN if I hit the big time. And so, I think part of that is what fuels my obsession with the web and media and what we do for a living in the ad tech space. But that's on the commercial side of this.
Yeah, and storytelling, I suspect. There's I look at you and I see someone who tells good stories and has a good story to tell, and so I suspect maybe that's where some of that maybe has come from. What do you? So obviously, with that not working out, what was your first job in either advertising or marketing or media in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing story. I went off to the University of Wisconsin, and I went to the University of Wisconsin to go have a good time. I got into far better academic institutions, but I was like a little bit socially awkward as a teenager, and went off to like the greatest party school in the U.S. And when I got there, I had a really good time, and so I was a C student. And I realized really early on, I probably wasn't going to get into law school. I wasn't going to get into medical school. Not that I wanted to, but, I think someone said to me, hey, like media is pretty cool. You should send out a bunch of resumes. And so I sent out resumes for internships to all the broadcast networks, all the ad agencies. And there were far more of them at that point in the mid 90s.
Wow.
And I hit the lottery because my resume was picked off a pile by a woman named Linda, who was a first-time sales manager at NBC, and today she's gone on to do some big, amazing things, and is the CEO of X. And so, yeah, she let me move into her office. She gave me unprecedented access and amazing responsibility. It felt like high pressure, but also 30 Rock is a pretty iconic place to hang out if you're 20 years old. And so I'd
Yeah.
go with my friends to the bars, and then I'd say, hey, like, do you want to go like see the studio where Saturday Night Live is filmed? And we like, this is pre 9/11. So you didn't have all the security that you've got today. We just like go waltz into 30 Rock at like 2 a.m. on a Friday night. And it was like amazing and magical. And so that really set the tone for me and opened my eyes to a world I didn't know existed as I was growing up.
Yeah, I mean, what an origin story. That is incredible. Yeah, I can only imagine that experience, and as far as a first role to achieve that's amazing. So, what do you think it was about the industry that drew you in, and then what kind of keeps you engaged with it to this day?
Yeah, I think the funny story is that on my first day as an unpaid intern, I think I had $10 in my pocket. And that $10 would get me on the train. It would get me into the office. Maybe it bought me a Big Mac, and it got me home. And I was invited to a really fancy lunch, and I sat there panicked, totally panicked. And I sat in a Japanese restaurant, and I ate, like, sort of picked at the white rice that they gave you for free. And one of my colleagues looked at me and said, what's going on here? Like, why didn't you order anything? You're not hungry? And I was like, well, very humbly said, I don't really have any money to pay for, for anything on this menu. And they're uh, like, there's a corporate card. What are you worried about? Like, this is on the house. And
Right.
I'm like, oh, wow, interesting. And I grew up really very much influenced by my parents, who said to me that life is a series of experiences. And this industry has given me a series of experiences that I will be forever grateful for. And so, whether it's the people who've allowed me to have those experiences or shared those experiences with me, or the places I've been, it's never dull and it's never boring. What keeps me in it is that the beauty of advertising is it's an imperfect science. I think if you look at the click through rate, which is not the best KPI, but if you use that as a benchmark, no matter how much has been invested in this industry over the past 20 years, I don't know, if you get a 1% click through rate, you are an absolute rock star. And so if you think about the beauty of art and science and creativity and storytelling, and you think about the fact that, maybe, just maybe, if you're really, really, really awesome at what you do, 1% of people are taking action upon that ad, then there's always room for improvement. And so as someone who is not satisfied with good, but always wants to be great, I'm constantly thinking about where is the improvement and how do we get there? Whether that's, I think in terms of the ability to get people to take action on ads, outcomes, buzzwords that we're talking about all day, every day. I'm not going to get into that. But more importantly, I think as I hit this stage in my career, giving that back to people who will forge that forward when I'm long gone, that becomes really important to me.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of kind of the legacy that people can leave behind in any industry, and the impact that you can have. And obviously, you have had on our industry because you have been in our industry for a minute. You've kind of done a lot. You've been exposed to a lot. You've had a lot of those incredible experiences that you just touched on. What advice would you give to someone that is maybe just starting out in their career in the media and advertising industry?
Yeah, let's get controversial for a second here, right? I think there's a lot of debate around the value of how much time you spend in an office. And,
Mm,
if I flash back 25 years to when I was starting out, I walked into an office 5 days a week, and I became obsessed with some of the executives around me, because I looked at them and I was like, wow, I want to be like you. I want to emulate
yeah.
you. I want to study you. I look at the things you do. I look at the way that you carry yourself. I look at the way you interact, and I look at the respect that people have for you. And I'm like taking mental notes all day, every day. So I think being immersed in an office atmosphere is really important, especially at the earliest stages of a career. Doesn't mean you have to be there 5 days a week. It doesn't mean you have to put in 100 hours, but it means you've got to put in the time and the effort. And I think there is, a return on that investment that comes as long as you're willing to put that in. So that's number one. Number two is, I think find a mentor, find an advocate, find a manager, find someone who is going to help you to navigate this like slippery slope known as a career. I think that my parents had jobs. They went to the same desk their entire lives. And, you've been at InfoSum for a long time now. You've built a career, but a career is a chapter, right? I think like this is a job, and, this is a chapter in your career. It's putting, your soul into something and really caring. And lastly, all of my social handles have the same tagline, which is, it's a quote from an old baseball player, a guy named Yogi Berra, who said, "You can observe a lot by watching." And, what does that mean? It means that there's so much information that you can take in, whether it's listening to podcasts like this, whether it's reading the trades, whether it's talking to your customers, your partners, or your peers. How do you get those inputs to then have the right outputs and make smart decisions? And so, how do you like absorb as much as you can by keeping your eyes open?
Yeah, I love all that advice. I think that's so powerful for anyone. I mean, I would say in any industry, it's not just about the media and advertising industry. I think any industry you're coming into, those kind of three pieces of advice are so powerful. If you can take them on board and if you can action them, and as you say, that the ones that kind of resonate with me is that idea of you observe other people and you see how they carry themselves. So that office culture, I think, is important. And obviously, I believe in a hybrid approach, but I think there is an importance to an office culture where you can observe how other people carry themselves, but also that learning you get just through kind of osmosis, just being around people while they're making those decisions, or kind of getting involved in that creativity is so important. And I think that is harder to happen, obviously, fully remotely, but also you've got to have the confidence to what you're saying. You've got to have the confidence to inject yourself into those situations as well and to get involved, which does take a unique level of confidence, I think.
For sure. And you have to learn from experience, right? And, I think it can be intimidating. It can be exhausting. At the same time, it can be amazing and fulfilling. And so, it's easy to gravitate towards, this is annoying. But at the same time, when you have those moments of greatness, you really recognize that and appreciate that.
Yeah, completely agree. Two-part question. What keeps you awake at night? And then what gets you up in the morning? What gets you motivated in the morning?
The practical answer to that is what gets me up in the morning is my 19-month-old daughter who's ready to watch Sesame Street bright and early and eat some Cheerios. And the thing that keeps me awake at night is a 4-month-old puppy that I just adopted over the holidays. But yeah, the reality is that this is an industry that's changing all day, every day, and it doesn't stop. And so when you look at the winds of change and you think about how they're picking up so abruptly in 2025, I mean, we're a couple of weeks in and every day there is a major story breaking. How do you keep up with that? And, for me, as someone who today is, how should I put it, free agent and thinking about what I want to go do next and trying to gather, again, those inputs that will help me to have a better output and to make a better decision and find myself in a place that I find gives me purpose every day and also allows me to take, I think, my personal characteristics that make me effective and deploy them in a way that makes the company better. That is a moving target. And that is really hard to keep up with. And so, it helps me to sleep really well at night because it's completely exhausting.
I can appreciate that. And you obviously mentioned that we do live in an industry that changes all the time. And I love that because I love change and it keeps me excited and it keeps me interested. But that can make it a very complex industry at the same time. So how would you describe what you do within media and advertising to a 10-year-old?
I think the answer is, whether you're 10 years old or whether you're my, I'll go back to my parents again. I'm going to make them listen to this because they're going to love the fact that, they're getting a little airtime here. It's really complicated and nuanced. And I think, one of the beauties of this industry is the ability to simplify it. right? I think the greatest people, the most iconic people, the smartest people, the most successful people are the people who can take something really complex and break it down and be able to explain it to someone at a cocktail party or, at an elementary school. And so when I think about what I do all day, it's helping marketers to connect with consumers on major media brands. It's that simple. And so if you're watching TV, it's creating a more efficient way for those advertisers to find people who buy their products. That's simple.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's super simple, but also, very to the point and very, very exact, which I like. The final of our quick fire questions, and it's a personal favorite of mine, although I am quickly learning it's not necessarily a personal favorite of everyone that I ask on the podcast. If there was a song that was a soundtrack to your life, what would it be?
Wow. This is a tricky one. I'm thinking about this. And I just happened to be listening to my 80s playlist yesterday while I was on the treadmill. And there was a song that came on that, always gets my adrenaline pumping, right? And when I think back to, iconic 80s movies, and I think about Rocky and I think about, The Eye of the Tiger. Right. Because, if I remember the lyrics correctly, like he went the distance, he's back on his feet, he's a man, he's got a will to survive. He took some chances, right? I'm paraphrasing here. You definitely don't want me to sing. But, I think The Eye of the Tiger was, about focus. And I think focus is so important as you think about career and you think about success. The most successful people I know have been highly focused on what they do. So, yeah, I'm going to go back to Eye of the Tiger. I'm trying to remember who sang it. I think it was Survivor.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great addition. So we have a playlist on Spotify where we add everyone's choices, and it's a pretty motivational playlist at this point. And so I think that makes a great addition to it. So we'll add that, and then everyone can enjoy it and get pumped while they're doing cardio or doing weights at the gym, whatever they want to use to kind of get motivated.
Perfect.
Using that playlist.
I will. I'll tap into that for my nightly miles tonight.
I love that. We'll move on to some of the more topic-related questions. But before we get into the kind of the specifics, I feel like you're one of those personalities that everyone in our industry is familiar with at this point. But in case there is someone listening to this podcast that isn't familiar, can you just give us a quick whistle-top tour of your career to date?
Yeah. Where do I start? I think, we've touched upon a bunch of things, but, I began my professional life in 1999, and 1999 was the peak of the dot-com bubble. And so as I was graduating from school, I was getting offers from a bunch of dot-coms that today are punchlines and jokes. But at that point, were going to make me paper millionaire. And, when you're 22 and you're moving to New York City and your eyes are wide open and you're like, cool, like, I want to go, I want to go make my mark. My dad sat me down one day and said, hey, like, you're off my payroll. I don't want you to get swept up in, all these offers that you're getting that are going to make you a lot of money on paper. But the reality is that there probably isn't a lot of longevity to this. So I started my professional life in broadcast. And so, at that point, in the late 90s, broadcast companies did not have dedicated digital teams. And so the opportunity to, really dip into, the idea of like a website for discovery.com, which was all given away. They were happy to take volunteers, and they were happy to take people who wanted to go and, and learn a little bit about the .com world. So, if I were to break down my resume a little bit, I spent a couple of years at Discovery. I spent a bunch of years in sales planning and asset management at ESPN, which was like my dream job, coming off of the story I told you about sports broadcasting. And then I went to Nielsen to learn about measurement. At that point, I took a pause and I said, okay, I'd gotten some really good advice from a mentor who told me that success, no matter what I go do, will be predicated on finding maximum exposure, meaning how many people can I go meet and touch and get to know, relationships? How do I forge those into something that's not transactional, but long-standing and authentic and, who I am? And then ultimately, how do you garner some leverage out of that? And so I ended up at a company called 24/7 Real Media. 24/7 Real Media had an ad server that rivaled DoubleClick at that point. Weekly rivaled DoubleClick. Had a boutique search agency and had a media business and a media network. And so, I was tasked with talking to publishers globally and getting to know all these up and coming digital newbies who at that point felt like they were small businesses, but turned into iconic franchises that we know of today and we're all using today. And so it wasn't uncommon for, me to get an inbound email from a bunch of guys who had a video site above a pizza shop in San Mateo, California called YouTube. And they were looking to make a couple bucks. And I got really close to the team at MySpace and eventually went to go work there. And so, for me, that was one of those moments where MySpace was the first programmatic publisher. It was owned by News Corp. The group I worked for was run by a guy named Adam Bain, who ended up to become the president and CEO of Twitter. And when you've got amazing talent around you, when you're really, you feel like you're onto something, it's incredibly motivational. And so that was an awesome moment in time. But then one day Murdoch got fickle. He shuttered the business. MySpace died. Facebook became, what it is today and what it has been for the past 2 decades. I joined the management team at Forbes. I worked to make a 95-year-old media company the most progressive on the web. I love the moment when we put Jay-Z on the cover and it went from being your dad's magazine to, the franchise and brand that rappers talked about and wanted to be on the cover of. And it felt like that was true transformation. I had a couple startups that failed. I think failure teaches you a lot. And in some of those experiences, it helped me to think about what is really a key priority in terms of a job search. And a lot of that's people. Yeah. I caught lightning in a bottle at a company called Ad Colony in 2014. We're a small LA-based startup. The gaming business is obviously bifurcated and completely separate from the mainstream ad tech and advertising industries. I think you know this pretty well. And I was obsessed with how to cross the chasm and bridge the gap. And so, there were days when I'd be on the New York City bus and I would see all these people playing Candy Crush, Angry Birds, and the ad experience was so much crisper and better on a game in an app than it was on the NBC app. And I couldn't understand it. And so we started to not just put pre-cached ads in SDKs in gaming, but also across some of the biggest mainstream publishers, in mobile, and then got acquired within a year. So great story. Spent about 7 years thinking about mobile. The year of mobile joke, definitely, hits home for me. And we got acquired by Opera. Opera then, went through some interesting times. Mobile became a programmatic business and not just a legacy ad network business. And again, it was this moment of transformation. I think great executives understand really kind of 3 key functions. It's really important to understand your operational market, obviously. I think that the capital market is an important part of this. And then there's privacy and the privacy business became real, and the privacy part of all of this became very real when Google announced that they were going to deprecate cookies. So I went to go work at a company called Zeotap because I thought that solving for data and privacy in Europe was the ultimate challenge. And, I don't know, why shouldn't this Yankee go do it? I'm not sure that anyone's actually going to go solve it anytime soon. We're going to chip away. But as a learning experience, it was absolutely fantastic. And so, we've seen that story play out for the past 5 years. I think, it's really made us a better industry, but it's also, I think been incredibly frustrating for all of us trying to see that traction and trying to see people start to pay more attention and emphasize it. And that's where you guys really show a lot of value. Lastly, I spent the past couple of years at a large SSP called Index Exchange. I led the Americas while simultaneously leading our global publishing business. As I said, I'm obsessed with media and content, and I think it becomes tougher for media businesses and content companies to run solid, healthy operations. And so, what does that look like? What is the future of the publisher, and how do you help to give them better services, better technology when maybe that's not their core competency? And so leaning into that has been an incredible source of pride. I'm really amazed at the progress we made as the industry changed from having this massive, obsessive, focus on quantity and tonnage, and shifted to quality, and shifted out of banners and boxes and into video. And so, again, coming back to the winds of change, I think there was a ton of change that happened during my tenure, and we handled it successfully. So, now I'm thinking about what I want to go do next. I think, I had a child 18 months ago, 19 months ago. I loved hanging around her all day. But at the same time, I kind of miss being around people who are solving tough digital problems. And so I'm starting to get back in the ring and think about and explore what comes next.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It feels like a journey where you were attracted to challenge. So where there was a challenge happening within the industry, but also transformation. And I sense that that's not going away anytime soon. And that this industry is, if anything, going to go through an even more dramatic change and more transformation in 2025 into 2026. So I'm super excited to kind of see what you do next, because there's definitely some challenges that need solving. And I think you're probably the guy to help us do that.
I appreciate that. I think, this is where, I know it's a podcast, and so people can't necessarily see me, but I used to have hair, right? My hair has fallen out. I've gotten some grays because of this. It's not always easy, but I think, when you start to find success and you start to find traction, and, I talk about MySpace being the first programmatic publisher, Forbes being incredibly progressive in taking, print business and making it digital, or even, Ad Colony in terms of, just going from the legacy of mobile being a network of networks business to your programmatic industry. I think that finding success and helping to make a market is really appealing, but it doesn't come without its challenges.
Yeah, for sure. And hey, if there was ever a time for a MySpace comeback, now might be the time with everything that's going on in the social media world.
That is so true.
So as we record this, last week was CES in Vegas, a big event, obviously a big event for a lot of industries, but specifically for the ad tech industry. And as always, a ton of interesting stories broke over the week. Comcast launched Universal Ads. Amazon launched its retail ad service. The merger of Hulu and Fubo TV. Experian launched a third-party data marketplace. And alongside the launch of Compass, Disney shared that it now has 157 million global monthly active users on its ad tier, which is an incredible number. What stood out for you in that news cycle last week? And what was your impression of CES 2025?
Yeah, this was the first CES I haven't been to in roughly 15 years, minus the pandemic, and so I was really okay with that, to be honest. But as a spectator and watching from afar, I think there are a couple things, and number one, I think what's going on at Meta right now is fascinating. The transformation of that company, and call it the evolution of Mark Zuckerberg. Really makes you wonder, in terms of new administration, obviously about to take office here in the States in a couple of days. The timing is really curious to me, but I think there is a responsibility, and what will that mean for the future of social? Maybe it means we go back to MySpace. I don't know, but I'm curious to see how marketers and advertisers and even consumers will respond. You touched upon Universal Ads and the announcement from Comcast. I think it's fascinating. And I think it dovetails really well into, some of the changes going on at Meta, where for over a decade now, broadcasters have wanted to tap into those social budgets and haven't had the mechanisms and the tools to be able to do so. And so, how do you democratize spend across SMBs and make it really easy for them to get into the space? Well, maybe AI is that tool. And so that one really stood out to me, not just because of the reality of, of the opportunity for, broadcasters and content companies to go out and steal that share, but also when you look at the partners who Comcast got to buy in, it was at virtually every major media company on the map. And so it's not easy to herd cats, and they've successfully checked that box. it was a busy week. And I think the momentum hasn't stopped heading into, this week. Some really interesting announcements following, right? I think you've seen Critteo's got a new CEO coming out of an agency, which I think is an interesting move. You've got Sincera getting swallowed up by the Trade Desk, which I think is a fantastic story. And a couple minutes ago, I read about a merger between mParticle and Rocket. And so, you may not even be up to date on that one because it's like hot off the presses. And so, keeping with the theme, never a dull moment. Yeah, I don't know, Ben, anything stand out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a fascinating week. I agree with you. I thought the Comcast announcement was super interesting, and it ties into some of the other things we're seeing in the industry. Obviously, I have a lot of opinions on some of the changes that are happening at Meta, specifically around some of the D&I initiatives and the protections they had in place for people like the LGBTQ plus community. But I think as you look at what Meta has done really, really well is they've made it just really easy to buy ads and reach an audience. And I think, to your point, other media owners need to learn from that and say, how can we make it just as easy for businesses of any size to reach audiences really, really effectively? And I think that's what hopefully they're going to achieve with this. And then obviously you've got everything that's going on with TikTok, and obviously, with a potential TikTok shutdown, which may actually have happened by the time this podcast goes live, or may not have happened by the time this podcast goes live.
You want to answer a prediction?
I'm going to predict it doesn't happen, is my prediction. I think something will change last minute. I'm seeing, again, I'm not as close to the American politics as yourself and
You're
obviously our
very
friends
lucky.
across the pond. But my sense is that, Biden has alluded to the fact that there might be something they do to stop it from happening. Trump has obviously alluded to the fact that he doesn't really want it to happen either. I'm sure some of his friends, Musk and Zuckerberg, kind of do want it to happen because obviously where does that spend go if it leaves TikTok? It goes to Instagram stories. It goes to YouTube shorts potentially. So for me, it's kind of, it's all intertwined. What are your thoughts on the TikTok situation and kind of how you see that playing out?
Oh boy, curveball. I actually think TikTok will get banned. And I
Right.
think it will get banned on January 19th. And then shortly thereafter, our new president will become a hero to 18 to 34-year-olds by finding a resolution. And so what will that look like? It will probably potentially fall in the hands of American ownership and, becomes a political win. And so, it's really interesting when you think about the concept of privacy, when you think about, the influence of the Chinese and all of this, and you think about where, again, the intersection of, what we do in the ad tech space or, just the media space and social and politics come together. This is that perfect storm. And so, I don't think anyone knows the answer, but I don't know, it just feels like the perfect, almost like PR vehicle to get a quick win, especially amongst a base of voters who, I think the president will look to, or the president-elect will look to solidify and get behind him.
Yeah, agree. I mean, by the time this comes out, as we say, this will maybe have all been resolved, and one of us will look very smart. We will wait and see how this actually plays out on January 19th. Yeah, exactly. You touched on something earlier, which I thought was really interesting around the people in our industry. And I think since I've joined the industry, I came from fintech into adtech. I've learned just how people driven it is. And obviously the tech is fantastic and the creative is fantastic, but it's the people that really make it what it is. And I feel fortunate in my career that I've been around and worked closely with incredible people who have shaped me, or even better, given me the space to shape myself. Two of them you know very well as well, Brian Lesser, Lauren Wetzel. What role have people played in your career to date?
Yeah, I think, let's touch upon Brian and Lauren for a second. I've known Brian for 20 years. It's kind of amazing, right? I talk about my time at 24/7 Real Media, and, Brian was, he was a product marketer. And that's what makes him so good at what he does. You touched upon the notion of storytelling, and, I talked about simplification. Well, Brian is the guy, like the guy, all capitals, bold print. And that's why I think he will be. He was great for InfoSum, and I think he will be amazing, back at Group M in
Yeah.
his role at WPP. But coming back to Brian and Lauren collectively, they're great human beings. And I think I have so much respect and I think, so highly of what you do at InfoSum, the problems you're solving for, but also the way that you take really complex challenges and you simplify it. And you do it in a culture that seems so warm, so inviting. And, again, like this is a people first industry. And it seems like the people who work at InfoSum are just fucking awesome. And that comes from the top. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot to be proud of when you work for people who I think really care and have empathy, but they're also really, really smart and great at what they do. And so, Brian was the face of the company for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. He passed the torch to Lauren, uh, and, she has not looked back. And in her first 6 months as CEO, um, wow, like, I am so impressed. And, she's a great friend of mine and we talk all the time. And, I think whether it's the relationship we have, outside of the industry, just talking about things like football and basketball and, life, or our dogs, or, the things that she's trying to solve for where, I can be an objective, friend and sounding board for her. Um, it's all about the relationship. And so, I think what you've got at InfoSum is really cool and really special. When I think about, the people who've shaped me, um, a lot of this, a lot of success is really, predicated on, being good and being lucky. And so, sometimes you make decisions because you're allowed access to people. Sometimes you make decisions because, you stumble into people. And I'll use Brian as an example, right? When Brian and I worked at 24/7 Media, it wasn't like he was Brian Lesser. He was just the guy who sat 3 cubes away. Um, and, you start to grow up with those people and you start to forge those relationships and they become, really important in helping you to navigate your way. Um, when I think about people I've worked closely with who've, really been influential, they all shame this. They all share the same characteristics, which is they all had like real confidence in me and allowed me to be me. And that's given me, uh, just the confidence in myself to be able to go out and take challenges and operate and not necessarily feel like I have to conform, but really become in many ways, you know, um, I think influenced by the best parts of all of those people. And so, whether it was Lindy Accarino and, still is, whether it was Adam Bain, in the time that I worked with him at MySpace, and I just saw like the calm, cool, collected way that he led. And, like here he was the president of News Corp, right? He, was like talking to Rupert every day. And we would go into meeting rooms and it's funny, my wife still makes fun of me for this, but one of my key takeaways from him was like, I like to sit on the floor in a conference room. I don't always like to sit at a table in a room that's like packed. And here's like a guy who is super senior, right? He should be sitting in the chairman's chair. And he would just sit on the floor in the back of the room, like totally chill. And I thought there was something to be said for just being like one of the guys, like one of the people. And you start to learn about character, persona, vision, presence, integrity, and that makes you want to be better at who you are, and be lethal in your approach to be a great executive.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's so important to have those people around you that give you the space, as you said, to kind of be the best version of yourself. There's a lot of execs that I've dealt with in other businesses in previous kind of careers who they want to protect their spot a lot and therefore they want to protect the vision around them. Whereas you have people like Lauren and like Brian who are so unselfish and are so willing to allow you to be the best version of yourself, to allow you to kind of spread your wings and that gives you the opportunity to do your best work because you feel comfortable, you feel confident, you feel safe. And I think that kind of relationship is so important for people as they grow their careers. You have to have that confidence in yourself. And I think most people can't bring it out in themselves. They need someone to bring it out in them, which is what I've experienced with.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think just to touch upon that and hammer home one final point, the best executives are servants to the employees that they work with, right? And they don't look for the employees to be servants to them. And so, when you empower your people and you've got confidence in your people and you want to help them be the best that they can be, that comes in very different, comes in a number of different flavors and forms. But the best executives, they don't think twice about it.
Yeah, completely agree. One thing I obviously in my role spend a lot of time thinking about is standing out and differentiating. I joined InfoSum over 7 years ago, and I've had the privilege of helping to define the InfoSum brand, but also helping to define the category of what is now data clean rooms. But now it's a super noisy market. Everyone is either claiming to be one or to have one. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what advice you would give to marketers like me who want to differentiate not only their company, but also something we're going to discuss a little bit later on, I think, which is kind of that personal brand. So what would be your advice to people trying to kind of battle that?
Yeah, I mean, look, you guys are leading the way that way. And so, when I think about what Lauren is doing today as being this fearless subject matter expert, I think she hits upon a couple of different things incredibly effectively. Number one, she's loud, right? She is using her platform to go out and make noise. And it's good for InfoSum. It's good for InfoSum's partners and clients. And I think what she's bringing is a level of credibility and subject matter expertise that perhaps your competitors aren't. And I think, she deserves a ton of credit for being that chief evangelist, right? Not just the chief executive, but, she's out there all day, every day, talking about not just the benefits of InfoSum specifically, but the value of the technology and what you're doing on behalf of your customers to create a better, more privacy-friendly environment to go out and transact in. And that's really important. And so her authenticity stands out. Her, her confidence is really amazing. But I think, if you're going out and you're trying to differentiate, to your point, it's tough. It's really tough. And, you could be in an event every week. You could be, buying paid placements on, the trades all the time. I'm not sure that's super effective in today's market. I think having leadership who understands the difference between one-to-one marketing and one-to-many marketing is really important. And then, finding that core group of not just customers, but customers who become advocates has an incredible cascading effect that shows ultimate success.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice. And I think it's a really good lesson that hopefully we can all learn as we kind of try and differentiate ourselves. And I think because you've had the career that you've had and you've seen it go through so many different stages, as you look back, what key shifts or moments stand out to you as having shaped the industry that we're in today and where we're now heading in 2025?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, when Rupert Murdoch acquired MySpace, and by the way, we've given MySpace more airtime than it's gotten in about 15 years anywhere. But when he bought it, he thought he was acquiring the next MTV. And shortly thereafter, the executives who, sat at News Corp recognized that they sat on the world's biggest data trove and that every one of those users was putting their life story into their profile. And so, when I look back, it was the notion of splitting the atom, if you will, between data and media. And you could target based on content and context, or you could target based on some type of addressable characteristic. That was massive. That was a seismic change. And so, there's a lot of, the history buffs, the adtech history buffs will look back in time and go, like who was the first programmatic publisher, or who was the first DSP, or who was the first SSP? But ultimately, a lot of this industry comes back to the origins of MySpace and the fact that at one point, MySpace inventory was 80% of all the page views on the web, which is wild to think about. And so, I think that was the moment to me that gave birth to an entire industry. There have been others. I think, the announcement that Google was going to deprecate cookies has absolutely wreaked havoc on everything that all of us do all day, every day for the past, 5 or 6 years. That was a big one. And I think there are some that will, are still to come and to be defined, right? You talked about TikTok. I think that, the area of privacy is still fairly nascent in the eyes of regulators. And what will that mean, not just for me here in the US or you in the UK, but globally and for, marketers and consumers to be able to consume content the way they have.
Yeah, totally. And I think what's you mentioned MySpace, and as far as that first kind of company that realized the data that they had and the data that they could use to reach consumers. And obviously we've seen that evolve. And obviously that's led to something that I'm incredibly passionate about, that I know you're incredibly passionate about, which is around privacy, which it feels like is a hotter topic now in our industry than it's ever been. Even in the US, where I know today it hasn't necessarily been a priority because there hasn't been that regulatory requirement that we've had in Europe with the GDPR. So how have you seen that evolution of focus on privacy manifesting itself into the technology that now we're hoping is going to underpin our industry?
Yeah, I think, privacy is really interesting because, we think about it and we talk about it all day, every day. But, if you go talk to your friends and your relatives and you ask them how they feel about privacy, they don't know.
Yeah.
And so going back, probably about 5 years to 2020, when Apple announced the introduction of ATT and consent, I think consumer awareness became, I would say, more relevant. And, consumers started to think more about, how do not cookies, but how do companies who use cookies or identifiers, what do they know about me? I thought that I was, sitting at home and, on my device, whether that's my phone or my laptop. And I thought, no one was looking over my shoulder. And all of a sudden, maybe they know a little bit more about me than I thought. And that can be challenging. And so, when I think about privacy and I think about, the evolution of what it means to consumers, what it means to principals, and what it means to everyone in between, it's only going to become a tougher market. Like, nothing will get easier. And if you think it gets easier, you're probably in the wrong business. And so, when it comes to education and it comes to understanding, privacy is incredibly complicated and complex. And it's one of those things where, I think far too many executives and far too many, industry professionals just turn a blind eye. And so how do we start to make it part of the day-to-day, part of the vernacular, part of, I think the onboarding for industry? It doesn't matter if you're, 2 years into your career or 20. I think it's an important subject for people to really understand at the most basic level. And so, I talked about consumer awareness, but I also think there's there should be some type of dedicated effort or, perhaps some type of testing process or some certification where we're all better versed in privacy, because that will, again, the rising tide lifts all ships, right? That will make us all better at what we do.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I feel like we're at a turning point in it. I think only a year or so ago, I was hearing execs describe kind of privacy as boring. It wasn't something they thought required the airtime. And I think now people are recognizing that it does require the airtime. It's not boring. It's something that's actually going to be incredibly pivotal to your business. And I often say any member of the C-suite, any exec, it should be their worst nightmare to see their company name in the next big data breach, data leakage, data misuse scandal. And that's why privacy is so important.
To that point, I think privacy equals friction for many executives, and they're just looking for smooth sailing. And so, your life is tough enough in this business, but then you introduce that additional layer of complexity. And by the way, a lot of it's written in, like what sounds like Latin, but heavy legalese, and it's tough to understand. And, you might be focused on, I don't know, like something as simple as just getting a video to play on a page. And then you have to think about making it, privacy friendly. That's really tough. I can also tell you that I'm one of the few people who will raise their hand and say, hey, like, I've gotten slapped with a GDPR violation as a executive at a company. And did I know what was going on? Absolutely not. But did I have to go through the motions of trying to, remedy that? It wasn't fun.
Yeah.
And so I'd rather get out ahead of it than have to clean up the mess, because the mess is time consuming, it's frustrating, and it can also be really expensive.
Yeah, completely agree. And we've touched on execs and leaders a lot. And I think one of the elements of being a business leader in 2025 and beyond, I think, is your personal brand and having that personal brand. It's my opinion that people want to hear, as you touched on earlier, actually, people want to hear more from people than from logos. And I think that's got to be your leadership. And you're one of those people that I suspect people would look to and say, you've done it really well. You've built that personal brand. You're a trusted individual in our industry. Was building a personal brand something that you purposefully set out to do? And what advice would you give to others who are trying to build that personal brand?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't deliberate, but I think as it started to pick up steam, I think there was more intention or intentionality that went into it. And so, I'll go back to what we touched upon earlier about being obsessed with some of the people who, I saw in an office early on. Uh, there was no social media in 2000 or 2002, but, their brand, if you will, was getting quoted in a print copy of Ad Age. And I thought, wow, that was really cool. That's something to aspire to. For me, you know, I, I've been very lucky to be the beneficiary of opportunity across this industry. And so whether that means, going to conferences, being invited to events, getting to know, the people who really sit at the epicenter. Some of that is luck. Some of it is, is really deliberate and intentional. But I think a lot of it gets highlighted in, in an industry that loves to, snap photos and glorify executives who I think have interesting stories. And that comes back to having an interesting story. And so, for me, I feel very lucky in that probably 95% of my time in ad tech, it doesn't feel like a job. It feels like what I love doing.
Nice.
And if you can wake up in the morning and you can go flip open your computer and feel like you're going to have a great day, you're really lucky. And, if you're able to get on an airplane and, go have some life experience and, meet some people or, see some places that you wouldn't otherwise see, even better. And so, as, my presence on Twitter, got bigger, I have no problem snapping a photo in an amazing place. You might not know who I'm with, but, odds are it's probably ad tech related. And so, I think there's a little bit of a mystique that, that started to grow around that. I think I have passion. I collect people, I collect interest, I collect experiences. Some days my brand is the Mets. Some days it's being a sneakerhead. Some days it's my obsession with design. Some days it's being a dad and my daughter, also my wife. And so, that all intersects and I live my life fairly publicly. And I do it in a way that I think is like very authentically me. Um, it's one of those things where there is a fine line and there's a lot of discretion that goes into it. It's not like I'm just like, hey, like, let's just like post to post.
Yeah.
There's always some type of meaning and some type of, thoughtfulness that goes into it. But, again, it sort of like becomes a catalog over 20 years. It's almost like a journal or a diary where I can go back and I'm like, wow, I remember this or I remember that. And I was really lucky to have those experiences with those people. And, for me, a lot of that comes back to that experience of walking into 24/7 Real Media 20 years ago and meeting some amazing people and starting to meet some amazing partners. And, and the fact that it allowed me to reinvent myself, not just as, someone who's trying to find their identity, but found their identity at the right time in an industry that was starting to become really hot and, and associating with the right people. And for that, I'll be forever grateful.
Yeah, I love that. And I think The authenticity is really important. I think that's something that definitely comes across. There are other people who I've seen made the mistake of it. It's more forced. It feels more a little bit more like corporate comms than kind of personal brand, and that's when it feels less authentic. I think one element of building that personal brand is something you've already touched on, actually, which is staying up to speed with the happenings in the industry, but having an opinion on it. And it's that latter part that I hear people struggle with the most, which is having an opinion, being comfortable forming that opinion, but then having the confidence to share that opinion. When did you get comfortable with that and gain that confidence in forming and sharing that opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it is such a good question. And it's such a good question because, the answer is I'm human. And, as I go out and go, hey, I've got a thought and I'm going to wrap it around, this idea or this change or this story, getting back to our predictions on TikTok, 50% chance that one of us is right, 50% chance one of us is wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't mind being wrong. I'm definitely not going to be right all the time. I think that, for me, finding that moment where I was like, you know what, I'm going to put it out there. A lot of that goes back to conversations with someone who is a really valuable mentor to me, who put himself out there in a very different industry. And, he's in the finance world. He's, a big hedge fund guy. And, he can be controversial. And he taught me that, you want to go out and shine on the soapbox, and you can't be afraid of people like throwing tomatoes at you if you're wrong, right? And
Right.
maybe you tell a joke and you're not funny. And it's not the end of the world. And so, I think having managers and executives around me who supported that was really, really important. I've also been in environments that didn't support it. And that becomes really, really challenging because you have to be mindful. The other part is, as an executive, you represent not just the company, but also the investors. And you have to be very, very, very deliberate. And so, when it comes to how I go out and put myself out there and the authenticity, look, like I'm not sitting there with like some type of planned out, content calendar here. Everything I do happens in real time. Most of my best thoughts happen on the treadmill, going for a run in Central Park, in the shower. They happen when people are like thinking.
Yeah.
And, I just go back and I'm like, hey, LinkedIn, dot, 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 dot. And, sometimes it catches fire and sometimes it doesn't. I've also spent a ton of time investing in relationships with the press and the reporters and editors who cover this industry.
Yeah.
And those relationships far too often feel transactional for the executive. And for me, there's a lot of reciprocity. I think that that reporters and editors have better intel and better information than a lot of the operators they're covering. And so sitting down with them, gathering information and feeling very comfortable talking to them, it doesn't mean that, the quotes that I use are just, they're not self-serving. They are tools for those, those relationships, those friends, those, industry colleagues to better their stories. And they help me to better understand what's going on around me because, there is no way to keep pace of all this at all times.
Yeah. And I think to your point, the industry does, it takes a lot to build that personal brand because you're not only doing your day job, but you're also trying to kind of maintain that personal brand. It can take a lot and it can be exhausting. And something that I've heard you be candid about and something that I've experienced myself is burnout. And you've obviously experienced that and you've stepped away from the industry day to day, as you've alluded to. Reflecting on the time since you kind of stepped away and had that time to kind of recover from burnout, what have you learned about yourself that has reshaped your perspective now as you kind of look for that next chapter for you?
Yeah, I mean, it is so important that we touch upon this because mental health is such an important thing for all of us to be conscious of. And I think, life is a long game. And as you get older and as you start to look around at people, who start to go through things or have problems and challenges, you start to want to live your best life. And, for 25 years, I was really proud of the fact that I was Matt the adtech guy, and that my screensaver said never not working, or I would joke about 24/7 real media not just being a company, being a lifestyle. And then one day it caught up to me. And maybe that was because the industry was just changing way too fast. Maybe that's because I felt responsible for the people who worked with me and for me. And I felt, like I had to make sure that I did everything I could to safeguard them. And then I also had a kid along the way and a wife to think about, take care of. And so what did that mean? It meant that, all of a sudden, what had always been clear and light and lively felt a little bit heavier and a little bit more challenging. And so I wasn't my best self. And so stepping aside and spending a few months catching my breath, what have I learned? It's an amazing thing when you don't have corporate email. You get a lot off. That's first and foremost. But, I think I've learned to enjoy the silence. I've learned that, no matter what, there's a fear and an insecurity for many of us that, if we step aside, we're not going to be relevant anymore. That's not the case, right? I'm sitting here recording a podcast for InfoSum. Like, I'm excited. I am really flattered to be here. I think that if relevance is important, I've learned that I should feel confident in who I am and the people around me and the relationships I've built. I've also thought about who I want to be moving forward and what does balance look like. I think that balance, as a father now and as a working father, is very different. And I thought I understood it before, but you don't really understand it until, you walk a mile in those shoes. Yeah. And so, having spent some time, stepping outside of my comfort zone, I think it's broadened, really my ability to empathize, my ability to focus, and, my ability to actually shut off a little bit, which is really, really tough to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is to your point, it's such an important conversation that we continue to have. Burnout is a massive issue in a lot of businesses and for a lot of individuals. And I think too often we don't talk about it. We mask it behind other things. I think especially the stereotype is especially men, right? We feel we have to hide it. I think in businesses, you often feel you have to hide it because you feel you're going to be judged by others around you for not being able to quote unquote handle it. So the more that we can talk about it and talk about it in the same way we would talk about physical health, I think is really important. So that feels like a really important message and actually a really important message to leave it on. So, this podcast is all about individuals like you, and we've gone through your career journey, and there is no doubt that you have pioneered new ways to use data to deliver those better customer experiences. So when you look at people you admire within the industry, who would you nominate for me to interview in an upcoming episode of Identity Architects?
All right, we are going to break new ground here. Because the person I admire the most in this industry is actually my wife. My wife is the Chief People Officer of Dentsu Media here in the Americas and leads a global business practice at Dentsu. And I thought I knew and understood my wife until the pandemic. And then we sat on opposite sides of a wall, and I listened to her lead, a large agency and lead with confidence and conviction and, be incredibly strategic in a way that I had no idea that a human resources professional operated. And so the way that she uses data to formulate her opinions and, really forge the future of that business at a time when agencies, it's a tough business to be in and the future looks really uncertain. She sits at the epicenter. And so I think I'm getting emotional saying this, but, she is a real badass. And, her POV on all this is really incredible. And yet, I don't think very many HR executives sit down and talk to data companies and privacy companies around how they think about the welfare of their business moving forward. So, Jamie Barash, you're on deck.
I love that. I think that's an incredible nomination. And we will definitely get her on the podcast. I will ask you for an introduction. I think that would be an amazing conversation, given the passions that I have around people and stuff. I just feel like that's going to be a really exciting conversation. Matt, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you for sharing so much about your career, the industry, your experiences. As I said at the start, you're one of those people that I think everyone's familiar with, and that you have transcended into being an industry contributor and leader into someone that's influencing the industry to a greater degree. So I appreciate you so much, and I just appreciate you being on the podcast with me today.
Ben, it has been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for having me. You guys are doing amazing work, and I am just absolutely grateful for the opportunity to be associated with everything you do.
Thanks again to Matt for being on the podcast. What an episode and what an epic career journey Matt has had. I can't wait to see what he does next and the impact and transformation that brings. All that leaves for me to do is to remind you to hit that subscribe button to know when the next episode of Identity Architects lands. But until then, thanks for listening.